The journey to me is allyship is the bare minimum. Allies are people who basically do no harm at the very least. They listen, can validate your experience and support you, but they don't take control. But when you decide that you're going to be active in allyship, you start to feel that you need to do more, and that more becomes mentorship.
Hello, I'm Laurie Shuster, Editor-in-Chief of SWE Magazine. Welcome to Diverse, a SWE podcast. A lot of people understand allyship as support, and we've created some great episodes around Allyship 101, essentially what allyship is and how to be an ally to women in STEM. But what happens when you have the power and the job title to actually change outcomes for women in engineering? How can you leverage allyship at the leadership level? And what does that look like in practice? We're diving into this topic today with two very special guests. Rob Douglas is the Chief Engineer for Planning and Scheduling at the Space Telescope Science Institute and the CEO of Citadel Professional Solutions, a career coaching firm. He is a SWE member and is the incoming co-chair of the He for SWE Affinity Group and a member of the SWE Mentor Network. And David Parrillo, Ph.D., is the Vice President of Packaging and Specialty Plastics Research and Development at Dow. David received the SWE Rodney D. Chip Memorial Award in 2025 for his efforts to advance women in engineering and technology. And just a quick note, the opinions shared in this episode are those of our guests and don't necessarily reflect the views of their employers. David and Rob, I'm really looking forward to this discussion of allyship at the leadership and executive level. Welcome to Diverse.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you very much for having us.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you very much.
Sure. Can you each introduce yourselves and then share from your perspective, where does allyship typically fall short in engineering environments? David, let's start with you.
So as you said, Laurie, my name's Dave Parrillo. I'm Vice President of R&D for Packaging and Specialty Plastics at Dow. It's a $28 billion division of the company. I've been in the chemical process industries and material science industries as an R&D person for 32 years now. And I'm based in Midland, Michigan, where I live with my family. Your question of where does it typically fall short in an engineering environment, allyship can be present either at a senior level, which is sort of the scope of this, or it can be present at a level someplace in the organization. You don't need to be a senior person to be an ally for sure, or a sponsor. But where it might fall short, and often does in my observation, is the infrastructure of the workplace in which you work. That infrastructure should be an inclusive environment, one that's conducive to allyship, one that's conducive to opening up opportunities for people and having them judged in a fair way based on their skills for those opportunities. If the environment is inclusive, it also should have people that might look like you or have your similar background. There's a feeling of inclusivity that permeates. And so when that environment doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that allyship won't work at all. Allyship is a necessary but maybe not sufficient thing or scale. You can have a singular ally or a group of allies at the company, but if you really want allyship to work or sponsorship to work in a meaningful way, the environment around it needs to be conducive to it doing its job. So that's where I would point to, potentially some room for improvement in some organizations.
That certainly makes sense to me. Rob, what about you?
Yes. Hi, Laurie. I'm Rob Douglas, and I've been the Chief Engineer for Planning and Scheduling at the Space Telescope Science Institute for about 12 years. That's the place we run the Hubble and James Webb Space Telescopes. From that role, what I have is oversight over the technical work being done by a large group of engineers working on the front-end software that we use for bringing science proposals and curating them through the system all the way into commands that we send up to the spacecraft. So I'm very much a technical leader. I don't fall on the functional manager side of things. If you look at it in a matrix kind of way. And as a result of that, one of my interests has been growing in, helping other people achieve higher levels of leadership and growth and leadership within an organization. And that's when I started my company of Citadel Professional Solutions to grow in that area, which is outside of what Space Telescope does. I'm actually also currently pursuing an MBA at Loyola University. So I believe that, in this idea of continuous growth, continuous education, and continuous investment in yourself and others. And so when I look at where allyship falls short, I've kind of looked at it from a systems point of view. Lack of intentionality is probably what I would charge as the biggest shortfall when allyship doesn't come to pass. People might express certain cultural values and identify that they want them to be aspirationally, but you can't just present values in front of people and expect them to grow towards them. You have to build that up with behaviors and actions and activities that grow that. So providing opportunities to live out those values and to see them and to hear stories. That I think is where allyship grows, and you have to see it, you have to experience it, you have to also reflect it and start to see that as a natural way of working, getting ahead, and building up teamwork and camaraderie.
Right. It's that follow through on what you've stated those values are. Rob, you spent decades, as you said, leading teams and mentoring others, both through your career and as a SWE volunteer. Can you walk us through what allyship actually looks like in a real moment for you? For example, like in a meeting or a performance discussion, what do you do different as you're aware of your role of being an ally in leadership?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that I came to understand my role as an ally kind of after the fact. It's not a label you go out and seek that you try to get. I actually think it's a label that is given onto you. You are invited to become an ally. I had the opportunity of several women engineers in my area who came to me to seek advice or growth or how to handle challenging situations and meetings. Just one example of a woman who was a peer to me, and we were in a meeting with a senior leader. It was several levels above me, so I was also feeling very excited to have this opportunity to speak to this person. And it was myself and two women who were peers to me at the level. And we're sitting in the meeting and addressing conversationally topics come out. And after the meeting, she said to me, did you notice that every time one of us stated something when he asked a question, he always looked at you? No, I hadn't noticed that. And to be honest, I was excited at the opportunity I had to interface at a senior leadership level. So I wasn't paying attention to how anything was going. Maybe I did feel a little bit extra excitement. And maybe that was because I was getting extra attention that I was unaware of. And that act of even bringing it up, the mere fact that this woman that I respected, that I knew her skills and abilities, has to spend some brain power wondering if she's being undermined. That struck me very deeply. I think that's probably the point at which I realized what allyship was without having a name for it yet, and that I was committed to being part of that. I would watch for those kind of things in other meetings. And so you watch for, hey, is somebody being not heard and their voice being diminished, or ideas that came from one person but are not being reflected in ownership later in the meeting. I very specifically now really try when I hear a good idea to bring back whose idea that was. And it's not just when it's a woman, it's any person who is given a good idea. Make sure that person's credit. As a leader, you're not there to grab the credit. You're there to make sure that people are seen. So that's what it looks like to me.
I love hearing that. I try to do that with my team as well. In the State of Women in Engineering issue of the magazine this year, we published a feature on why mentorship alone isn't enough and why sponsorship, which is sort of really going out and advocating for someone else in a role or a function, even when that person is not in the room, why that matters so much for women in STEM. From your experience, building on those experiences that you had, what does the difference between mentorship and sponsorship look like for you in practice?
I'm glad you asked. This is actually something I've been thinking a lot about again, systems thinking, system engineering. I'm thinking how this all works. And I've been, reflecting on allyship, and I have started to see allyship as a journey, not an event. You don't come and join it once, and you grow in it and you grow deeper in it. And I've tied it a little bit to where you are in your career. In about 2020, SWE published an article called Fixing the Broken Rung, and it really struck with me. And that kind of ties into what I'm seeing as this journey. So the journey to me is allyship is the bare minimum. Allies are people who basically do no harm at the very least. They listen, can validate your experience and support you, but they don't take control. But when you decide that you're going to be active in allyship, you start to feel that you need to do more, and that more becomes mentorship. Mentors have this ability to broaden your perspective, to help you become more aware of where you are, your self-awareness. They keep you accountable to your own ideas, what you want to do. One step further, mentors can grow into something even more powerful, which is coaches. And coaches do something that's even deeper than a mentor. A mentor can help you a lot. Someone who focuses on coaching as their goal, they're looking at what your goals are, but they're also seeing opportunities and skills that you can't see and bringing them to you and bringing them to your forefront. It's like, you may not be aware, but you should go learn this because that's going to present you with these future opportunities. A lot of times your managers, a good manager is a coach. So you have to already be pretty deep into the organization and deep into your career level. You have to have grown technically senior and to the point that you're, in management at this point to be available as a coach within the organization. The next level to me is taking that level of political influence that you have and becoming a sponsor. And the difference there is, while the coach is speaking to you about opportunities that you can have to you, the sponsor is speaking about your abilities to other people. They're representing you when you're not in the room. Choosing to be a sponsor is another growth path of allyship. It's using your political clout and your political leverage to advance someone else. It does not come without political risk as well. If you advocate for someone and that person is not able to perform, it's going to reflect on you. So sponsorship is a commitment. It's part of this growth in being more of an ally. And then I have one more level beyond sponsors. And this is the one that you have to be very senior in your career, very senior in an organization, which I call champions. And those are people who create the system structures that enable long-term success for others. And that's why I see it as a journey, is that you can start early. In for SWE, we have a section of collegiate outreach. We want to see male allies in college already starting to be engaged before they've even graduated and started their career. And then we want to work with the early career affinity group through the mentor network. I met a woman there and we collaborated together and did a presentation on allyship to early career women. How do you find your allies and bring them in? But I bring up this idea in that talk. And this is hopefully will be the subject of a We26 talk.
That would be great.
We can bring people to these ideas early so they're already looking for them. They realize that there isn't a done state of allyship. And if you know that people are not done, then you also will hold them accountable to not being done. I need to be held accountable to not saying, okay, I did enough. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Accountability is such a key piece. And I love that idea of it being a journey from ally to coach to sponsor to champion. David, at your level at Dow, you're shaping global teams and strategy. How does allyship and sponsorship and these other roles, how do they show up differently when you have that level of executive influence?
Yeah, I mean, at first, Laurie, I think it's a good question, but I would come back to basics and say that you don't need to be at a certain level in the organization to be an ally. And you don't need to be at a certain level in an organization to be a sponsor. I think it's a role that just about anybody can take. And allies there, just like we use the word ally colloquially, they're there when you need them. They're there to speak up for you when you're not there. They're there when you have confusing moments. It's meant to be a selfless act. It's not meant to be something that you get a red badge of courage for. So when no one's watching, are you an ally is sort of the metric that, I would always use. Of course, when you're at a higher grade level within the company, if you're managing a group of 100 or 1,000 or 2,000, you have a lot of visibility by definition in the role. And so you have a lot of eyes on you. right? And the way that you conduct yourself as a sponsor or as an ally is really important. And that visibility is really just because of your position. But some of the more effective ways that I've been an ally to someone in the organization, in my organization or another organization at the companies that I've worked for, hasn't actually been known by a lot of people. It's been in sessions with that person and in other people at the company that I want to speak to on the person's behalf or introduce the people to potentially get an opportunity, or to speak out when I see something about either that person or that group of people that they might represent in terms of fair treatment of that person or group of people in an inclusive environment. So the first thing I would say is it's independent of grade level or status. It's selfless, the second leg of the stool. And third, it should be visible only when it needs to be visible, right? If you have to speak up or speak out on someone's behalf. Certainly at a certain point in the ladder of a company, you can sponsor people for a wide variety of things or be an ally on a wide variety of things. You have a lot more visibility into the organization. But I found the most effective programs at companies like the one that I work for now, Dow, is structured sort of sponsorship or allyship. And that means that you're relying on the infrastructure of the organization. You meet people through employee resource groups. You meet people through sponsorship level programs. All of these things take you from a mentor or a sponsor up to being an ally. And an ally can be for just one person or can be for a group of people. I would sort of stress those things, Laurie, in response to the question.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot about the difference between the structures that are in place in the corporate world and corporate cultures at various employers. Where do you see the biggest gaps between individual allyship and an organizational approach that works, Rob?
Part of it is that sense of scale. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about culture. At an individual level, you can meet people where they are and you can see their challenges. You can see their dreams, their goals, their pain, their hurt, and you can basically tend their wounds or meet their needs. But at an organizational level, what you want to be doing is looking at the system and make sure that there are not systems in place that are negatively impacting some individuals. When we went home in 2020 with COVID, it became very weird for working parents. And as we know, still, women bear the bulk of the impact on child rearing. I noticed it in my work areas. I myself had less time to work, but I had older kids, but I saw women with younger kids who weren't able to work the same number of hours or during the same timeframes as we were trying to negotiate what this working from home offline thing was that we were doing. And one of the things the organization did, they put into place, was they revamped the rules around how leave could be used and made it more flexible. I believe it was very well received by people who were, caring for young children and bearing the brunt of that. And as I said, predominantly women had the greater share of that impact. And that was a very powerful organizational trait that showed the organization itself being an ally.
Right. David, what are some of the structures that you were thinking of when you mentioned that you would recommend companies who want to pursue more structural solutions? What are some that you have found have had the most effect?
Yeah, I mean, they range from structured solutions around sponsorship or allyship to all the way from just basic infrastructure at the company. And let me give you some examples, Laurie. If you're interviewing someone for a role and you want to assess talent, you put a job description out there, and that job description is meant to attract a broad spectrum of talent. And then you will choose an individual for this one opportunity based on interviews or interactions, short to long interactions with that individual. And maybe a group of people will interview that individual or individuals to make the selection. At a company, a structured practice that I would speak to is what I would call engineering controls, where you say, okay, listen, I'm going to post this job I've really taken a look at the job language to make sure it's, as unbiased as possible. It doesn't refer to a single group. It shows it's meant to attract the broadest group of people that fit the job requirements. And then you have engineering controls. SWE's an engineering organization. So the engineering controls say that you should have a broad representation in that interview pool. And then when the individual's selected, they are selected based on talent, but the interview team is also based on a broad spectrum of people from the organization, from different genders. And this kind of an engineering control ensures that people get equal opportunity for positions. Well, there's a symbiotic relationship between this engineering control and being an ally or a sponsor to someone and making people aware of their skills and talents and giving them opportunities in an organization. You can see how they can, feed off of one another. There are other programs that reinforce this as well in terms of structure. There can be structured sponsorship programs. I remember a program that I participated in Dow called Sponsor to Success, where more than 20 women in this particular case were sponsored by both men and women on a one-on-one basis over a period of a 20-week program, where we sought instruction together, where we actually sponsored those people for other jobs within the organization. And we both learned how to be sponsors, how to be a sponsee, how to be an ally, how to be someone who's receptive to others being an ally. That's a structured program. And I'll give you one more example that I think really kind of makes it concrete. And that is a program at Dow that I'm extremely proud of. And it's a program called Gigs. And what a gig allows you to do is it allows you to spend 10% of your time in another organization for 3 to 6 months while you retain your current job. And those opportunities are posted, and people interview with the same engineering controls to get those gigs. Now, why is that so important in terms of allyship and sponsorship? Again, it reinforces this whole concept. There can be self-directed career development. You might be encouraged by an ally or a sponsor to go for this opportunity. But because the engineering controls are in place, and because this opportunity is fairly low risk, the person gets to explore different parts of their career and their strengths and their weaknesses. That wouldn't exist if that particular program wasn't there. And we had data before this that indicated when a manager gives someone a special opportunity for their career, a part-time role within the team, they do it, quite frankly, and a lot of times in a biased way. These things aren't panaceas, but they form infrastructure in which sponsorship and allyship can occur and can thrive. So I'm all about scaling things, as Rob said. And in order to scale something, you have to have the right ingredients. You have to have the sunlight, the fertilizer, all of the right parameters to get the plant to grow, right? These are the important things when I talked about structured programs.
It sounds like a really great program. I love the idea of giving people an opportunity to see how they do in other roles. You never know what talents they have until they get to try them out.
I really like that too, David. That's a great idea. And it goes back to something we talked about earlier about being intentional, like having that intentionality. And I think I would tie in good allyship is not favoring one particular group, but it's breaking down the systemic issues that cause disfavor to some groups.
100%. Absolutely agree. As we wrap up, we always like to leave our listeners with some advice. So for someone listening, especially someone in a leadership position, what's one thing they could start doing to practice more intentional allyship and sponsorship for women in STEM? David, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. First, my advice to all of you who are listening is, start with some data. Get as much data as you can on what's happening in your organization at the company. It can help you. It allowed me to create programs like Gigs and Sponsor to Success and other programs like that. Get data that shows you where there are gaps in your organization in terms of people being able to share their talents and give all that they can be at work. The next one is, take a look at your processes. Make sure that your interviewing process and every piece of your talent management process is wrapped around inclusive behavior and sponsorship and allyship. And I gave you several examples of that. And then stress to people that, the ally thing is a selfless act, but it also can be tremendously rewarding, even if no one else knows that you've done the things that you've done. If it's not in the Wall Street Journal, it's okay. It's selfless behavior resonates within you, like when you strike a tuning fork. It resonates within you and it reverberates to other people. And if you don't know what Rob and I are talking about, if you've never been an ally or never been a sponsor, then find out somebody who has, or find out somebody who's been impacted by someone who is an ally or a sponsor. You get a hold of them and ask them what that experience was all about, and then dive in yourself. You don't need to be a CEO and you don't need to be a vice president. You can be an ally to someone within your organization, and it can be impactful for both you and it can be impactful for them. And then lastly, Laurie, engineers, because we're engineers, always think about scaling. Always think when you find a best practice, how can you share it with someone so that this effect can scale in a positive way in your organization, in your work group, in your community? Thanks, Laurie, very much for having us. And I really appreciate the questions and the dialogue today.
Oh, thanks. I'm so grateful to you both for being here. Rob, what do you think about, what would be one or two steps you would recommend for somebody who's listening who hasn't thought about this before? What could be some steps they could take immediately?
Yeah, I like what David said, but I'll try to add on to it in a different way. First, figure out where you are. You specifically asked for especially people who find themselves in leadership. So, learn about this progression, this journey of allyship and where you are, and look at where you are on that scale and where you could be, what influences you have. And then start looking at, your everyday actions and just take an inventory of things you do in there. Do you redirect credit? Do you interrupt bias? Do you create inclusive opportunities? And that focuses a lot on, looking at people outside you instead of looking at what you're doing and being inside yourself. When you start to build those ally networks, you expand your influence and create certain momentum in the organization. Build on that momentum. Support others. That strengthens your ability to be a leader. When you're a good leader, that shows through in the way that they support other people, the way they lift them up. You can tell the good leaders because they're not standing at the front of the line with everybody hidden behind you, but instead they're the ones who are making sure their teams are the ones out in front getting the success. Because the goal is not individual success, but this long-term sustainable success for others. And that's, I think, goes to what David said about being able to think like an engineer and scale up. And you want to be able to scale up and scale infinitely. This isn't a win-lose game. Simon Sinek calls it the infinite game, where you can hop in and you have to build on win-wins for everybody because you're not trying to beat anybody else. You're trying to grow everybody together.
That absolutely makes sense to me. We haven't had our videos on, so you haven't seen how much I've been smiling throughout this whole interview. I am so glad to know that there are leaders out there like you, David and Rob, who are thinking beyond just their own success and thinking about the success of the team, the success of the company, the success of those around them who might otherwise not get all the opportunities that they should. And so I want to really thank you for having this conversation with us, for being allies and sponsors of women, for being part of SWE, and for coming on with us today.
And I want to thank you, Laurie, for having us. It's really a deep honor to be asked to speak on this topic, especially to Society of Women Engineers. As I said, when I started, my goal was mostly just listening. And as a person who's kind of a bit type A, before that, I would always want to go in and solve problems. And so my membership in SWE has been an exercise in listening and learning, which is good for me. And I hope that allows me to give back. So thank you so much for this. And I hope that this resonates with the listeners, that we can provide some help.
Thanks, Laurie, for the opportunity, and thanks to the Society for the podcast.
Men allies are always welcome within SWE, so you can go and visit SWE.org to learn more about the organization, how to join as a member, and how to get involved in ways that speak to you. Be sure to check out the members-only He for SWE affinity group, which aims to grow inclusion and advocacy efforts by increasing men allies in STEM fields. And membership in any other SWE affinity group is open to all SWE members interested in participating. Thank you so much. I'm Laurie Shuster, and from all of us at SWE, thanks for listening.